Ma'am, I need you to step down off that porch and onto the driveway for me. The HOA has reported you for trespassing on common property." Those were the first words out of Deputy Eli Mercer's mouth at 6:12 in the morning. With red and blue light washing over Samantha Fletcher's cedar posts and turning the dew on her railings into little blinking beads. He stood at the bottom step in a pressed brown uniform that still held dry cleaner creases. Hat tucked under one arm, one hand resting near his radio like he wished this call had gone to somebody else. Behind him, just left of the patrol SUV, Carolyn Prescott stood with both feet planted in wet Georgia clay, pearls at her throat, wide-brimmed hat pitched forward, oversized sunglasses on despite the weak pre-sunrise gray, and a white clipboard clutched to her chest as if the board had knighted her for combat. Samantha stayed where she was, in the old hickory rocking chair her father had refinished twice. One heel hooked on the porch plank, the other foot pushing a slow, shallow rhythm. Her coffee was black and hot enough to steam in the cold edge of morning. She took one sip and set the mug down on the hand-milled rail without a clink. The shed sat 30 yards behind her, square and clean and painted barn red, the same deep tone as the trim on the old equipment barn that had been on that land since before Maple Hollow Estates had even poured its first curb. The smell in the air was wet dirt, pine needles, and the faint chemical tang of patrol car exhaust. Carolyn didn't wait for the deputy to continue. "You are in active violation of the Maple Hollow Standards Code," she said, voice loud enough to jump the fence line. "You have ignored notices, fines, and corrective orders. You currently owe $10,000 in assessed penalties, and this structure remains non-compliant. This area falls under HOA visual jurisdiction, and she is refusing lawful correction." She stabbed a manicured fingernail at the shed, like she was identifying contraband. "That color is not approved. We voted. We served notice. She is obstructing. That is trespassing." Deputy Mercer looked from Carolyn to Samantha and back again. His expression didn't match Carolyn's volume. It looked like arithmetic that wasn't adding up. "Miss Fletcher," he said, more careful now, "do you have ID on you? And maybe any paperwork on the property boundary? I'm just trying to sort this clean." He cleared his throat. Dispatch advised this was a disputed common-use zone with an unauthorized outbuilding. Samantha met his eyes and nodded once. "My ID's inside. Same place it's been for 22 years, she said. Her voice came out low and level, the way it had in county meetings when tempers got hot and facts stayed stubborn. "And that's not a disputed zone. That's my backyard." Carolyn made a sharp sound through her nose. "No, it is not. Don't let her do this. She talks like she's in charge of permitting because she used to push paper at county offices. We have bylaws. We have authority. The board already voted corrective entry." She flipped a page with a dramatic snap. She was fined $500, then $1,000, then continuing penalties. She has ignored every official communication and is now occupying HOA-regulated land with an illegal paint scheme. Samantha glanced past Carolyn at the tire marks in her yard where the woman's golf cart had cut through after yesterday's rain. The tracks were bright against the dark soil, leading right up to the fence gate Carolyn had never been invited to touch. Heels, she noticed, sank deeper when someone wanted an audience. Carolyn shifted her weight, and the clay took another half-inch of her expensive shoe. Samantha felt the corner of her mouth almost turn, not from joy, not from anger, just from the plain absurdity of being lectured about trespass by a woman standing 3 feet over a property pin she had never once bothered to verify. Another squad car idled at the roadside shoulder, lights still rotating. A second deputy stayed by the hood, speaking softly into a shoulder mic. The creek behind the sweet gum kept moving like none of this mattered. A barred owl called once and then went quiet. Samantha counted 3 breaths before she spoke again. An old habit from plan review days when contractors came in certain they were right and left carrying correction lists. "Deputy," she said, "I'm not resisting you. I'm not threatening anybody. I'm sitting on my own porch drinking coffee. If you need me to stand, I'll stand. If you need paperwork, I can get paperwork. But I'm not stepping off this porch because somebody with a clipboard says my land changed ownership overnight." Carolyn's face reddened under the edge of her sunglasses. Listen to that tone. This is the attitude we have dealt with for months. She thinks county exceptions apply forever. They don't. Maple Hollow has standards. Uniformity protects property values. She signed nothing because she refuses community responsibility, and now we are forced to involve law enforcement. She turned to Mercer, as if reading him meeting minutes. "Please remove her from the area so our corrective contractor can begin at 7 sharp. I have a crew on standby." Mercer blinked at that. "You have a crew coming this morning?" "Yes, for repaint and compliance restoration," Carolyn said. "Board authorized." Samantha rocked once, twice, wood creaking under a familiar weight. The words "crew on standby" settled in her chest like cold iron, but her face stayed still. 7 sharp meant they had planned entry, planned labor, planned billing, planned humiliation, and done it before daylight, hoping surprise would do what law couldn't. She rested her palm on the rail her father had milled by hand and felt the groove where his thumb had slipped with the planer decades ago. She had traced that mark during storms, during hospital calls, during the week Daniel came home the last time and slept more than he spoke. It was a small carved flaw, and it had outlived everybody who made it. "Deputy," she said, "would you like the short version or the useful one?" He almost smiled despite himself. "Useful, ma'am. The useful one is that this parcel is not HOA common anything. Never has been. My shed color is county compliant under an existing file that predates Maple Hollow by years, and if anyone tries to enter my fenced yard at 7, they'll be trespassing." Carolyn stepped forward so fast, her clipboard nearly slipped. "That is false. You cannot trespass the board on board-governed land. This is exactly why we sought enforcement." She keeps using old county language to dodge neighborhood law. Samantha looked at the deputy, not at Carolyn. "Neighborhood law isn't a thing," she said quietly. "Recorded land records are a thing." For a moment, nobody moved. Patrol lights painted the sweet gum trunk in slow blue pulses. The barn-red shed glowed dark and steady in the half-light, neither ashamed nor uncertain. Mercer shifted his stance and lowered his voice. "Miss Fletcher, I need to ask this directly. Are you refusing to comply with a lawful order to vacate what's being identified as HOA common property?" Samantha picked up her mug again, took another slow sip, and set it down exactly where it had been before. No flinch, no rush, no raised voice. "I'm declining to surrender my own yard to somebody else's mistake," she said. "There's a difference." Carolyn let out a tight laugh that didn't sound amused. "You hear that? Document that. She is openly non-compliant." She lifted her phone, already recording. "State for the record that she has been informed of the $10,000 fine and refuses corrective entry." Mercer exhaled, long and controlled, then keyed his radio for property verification and code contact support. Samantha heard him request parcel confirmation by tax map, easement overlays, and current complaint status. That told her enough. He wasn't buying theater, and he wasn't ready to take anyone's side without paper. Good. Paper was where this ended. She looked once more at Carolyn's shoes sinking deeper into the clay, at the pearls bright against a raincoat that still had boutique tags stitched in the cuff seam, at the clipboard held like a badge from a government she had invented in her own mind. Then Samantha leaned back in the rocker, folded one hand over the other, and marked the moment with the same cool certainty she had carried through 26 years of permit battles. Samantha thought back to how they had gotten there in the first place. Knowing what happened next would shake that whole community to its roots. Samantha stayed in the rocker while Deputy Mercer spoke into his radio. And for a few seconds, the only voices on her porch were clipped call signs and Carolyn Prescott's impatient breathing. The patrol lights kept circling over the sweet gum, over the barn-red shed, over Carolyn's white clipboard, making all of it look like a stage set somebody had lit too hard. Samantha watched Mercer listen, nod, ask for a repeat on parcel overlays, then step 2 paces aside to hear better. Carolyn took that as momentum and started composing herself for a victory speech. That was when Samantha decided, very calmly, that this was the point where the story had to pause before it could make sense. She leaned forward, rested her forearms on her knees, and said to Mercer in the same even tone, "Deputy, while dispatch does what dispatch does, you're going to need context if you want this clean." Then she looked past him, out toward the road where a few porch lights had flipped on up Maple Hollow's entrance, and she added, almost like she was speaking to neighbors gathered at a fence line, "And if folks are going to talk about this later, they should hear it right. What happened next shook this whole community to its roots. But it didn't start this morning." Carolyn snapped her clipboard shut. "This is not story time. This is enforcement." Samantha gave her one brief glance. "That right there has been the problem from day one," she said. "You hear a sentence and think it's a vote." Mercer cleared his throat. "Mrs. Fletcher, I can listen while we verify." He kept his posture neutral, shoulders squared, but not aggressive. "I'd appreciate background." "Good," Samantha said, "because paper without history gets people in trouble." She sat back again, and the rocker creaked once in that old familiar way, low and wooden, like a porch settling into itself. The creak behind the tree line carried on, steady as breathing. In that narrow pocket of dawn with flashing lights on one side and wet pasture on the other, Samantha started at the only place she believed these things should start. Name, land, record. She was Samantha Fletcher, 52 years old, retired after 26 years as a county civil plans examiner. The woman contractors learned not to bluff because she read every line, every note, every revision cloud, every missing signature block. She had been the person who caught inverted drainage arrows at 5:30 on a Friday and sent whole packets back because one unchecked box could flood a road 2 winters later. She had worked third-floor plan review in Cedar Ridge County through 2 recessions, 3 building booms, and 1 tornado season that made everybody suddenly care about culverts they had ignored for a decade. She had no interest in neighborhood theater. She liked coffee hot, fences straight, and records where records belonged. The property under her rocker wasn't a lifestyle choice. Her grandparents bought those 3 acres in 1971, before Maple Hollow Estates had a name, before the county widened Lake Spur Road, before anybody called the corridor desirable. They bought it because the soil drained right on the high side and held moisture on the low side, because a spring-fed creek traced the back edge, because her grandfather said if a place can feed a garden and survive a hard rain without stealing your sleep, you hold it. He and her grandmother paid it off in 12 years, built the first shed themselves, then added the cedar porch in pieces over 3 summers, board by board, after his shift work at the mill. By the second week of June in 1983, Samantha was old enough to hand him fasteners and young enough to think a framing square was a kind of magic. He taught her grade by eye, not because instruments were bad, but because weather and patience still mattered when instruments disagreed with the ground. He taught her to run a string line tight, to test slope with water in a clear tube, to leave room for roots you couldn't yet see. None of it felt like legal authority back then. It felt like chores and July heat and the smell of cut pine in your clothes. Later, those same habits became a profession. When she was 15, she lost both parents in the same year, and her grandparents did what steady people do when there is no elegant way through grief. They fed her, put her to work, and kept the house running on routine so she could keep breathing inside it. That land held her through high school, through night classes, through county certification exams, through the first paycheck she brought home, and laid on her grandmother's kitchen table like proof she wasn't drifting. Every fence repair, every drain swale clean-out, every post she reset after storms added up into the one fact that mattered now. She did not inherit a postcard. She inherited responsibility. Carolyn shifted in the clay and muttered, "None of this changes the bylaws." Samantha didn't rise to it. "No, ma'am," she said. "It changes jurisdiction." Mercer looked down at his notepad and kept writing. Samantha continued, giving him dates because dates were anchors. In 1998, her grandparents placed the parcel in a family trust and designated the home site as non-subdividable agricultural residential use under county code then in force. In 2007, after her grandmother passed, the trust transferred sole occupancy rights to Samantha, with survivorship conversion language her lawyer had insisted on, because development pressure was already creeping in from the lake. In 2011, she recorded the final deed transfer and updated the tax map references herself at the assessor's office on a Thursday afternoon, where she knew half the clerks by first name. Same parcel number, same boundary pins, same recorded easement language. No annexation into any homeowners association. No signature consenting to covenant control. No ambiguity. She gestured with 2 fingers toward the shed, without looking back at it. That outbuilding has a permit file. Not a rumor, not a handshake. File. Her voice stayed quiet, but each word landed clean. Accessory structure replacement approved under historical color schedule for legacy Aggie parcels. Barn red is listed. It was listed before Maple Hollow poured their clubhouse slab. Carolyn let out a short laugh. Historic color schedule is for farm operations. Correct, Samantha said. This parcel remains coded from that family operation. Grandfathered status isn't a mood. It's a record. A breeze moved across the yard and brought the smell of wet clay and creosote from the utility poles up the road. Mercer keyed his shoulder mic again and asked dispatch to pull archived permit references under the parcel ID Samantha gave from memory. No hesitation, no paper in hand. That was when his expression shifted from polite uncertainty to professional attention. Carolyn saw it and tightened her jaw. Samantha kept going because this was the part people always skipped when they wanted quick authority. The underlying systems they benefited from while pretending they did not exist. Maple Hollow came in phases, she said. Phase 1 cut the main entrance and 32 lots. Phase 2 added the clubhouse and retention improvements. Their stormwater waiver wasn't automatic. County required performance evidence. They got it because this parcel already had a grandfathered basin and overflow channel tied to an old private maintenance covenant. She tapped the porch rail with one knuckle, soft. My family's covenant. Carolyn's sunglasses hid her eyes, but the rest of her face gave away the first crack. That basin is county drainage. It is privately maintained infrastructure recognized by county for compliance calculations, Samantha said. Different sentence, big difference. 3 days before this morning, Carolyn had sent the certified letter threatening forced repaint and contractor mobilization fees. Samantha had signed for it at 4:18 p.m., set it next to her sink, washed her hands, and read every page twice. The letter cited bylaws, sanctions, aesthetic harm, and board authority. It did not cite one enforceable instrument tying Samantha's deed to Maple Hollow's covenants. It did, however, attach an invoice draft for labor on land the board did not own. That single page told Samantha exactly how far Carolyn was willing to overreach and exactly where the county would care. She had called no one that evening. She had pulled her old county binders from the hall closet, laid them on the dining table Daniel had built, and assembled what she called the useful stack. Deed chain, trust transfer, parcel map, permit approvals, covenant text, maintenance logs, certified letter envelope, and printed stills from the security camera pointed at the fence gate. No drama, no speeches, just sequence. If someone arrived before sunrise with patrol cars and a contractor, she would be ready in slippers. Now, on the porch, with Mercer still waiting on dispatch and Carolyn trying to will reality into compliance through posture alone, Samantha gave the final line of her own introduction. "I retired from county last year because I was tired, not because I forgot how this works," she said. "I spent 26 years telling people the same thing. Rights come from recorded instruments, not volume. That was true when I sat behind a counter, and it is true on this porch." Her phone buzzed once on the side table, then again, neighbors waking up and texting what they were seeing from windows. She ignored it for the moment, then looked toward the road and, with dry timing that barely moved her expression, said, "And since half the county is going to hear a version of this by lunch anyway, where are folks watching from this morning? Drop your city when this story gets around. Cedar Ridge can't be the only place where somebody with a clipboard mistakes herself for a courthouse." Even Mercer let a brief smile slip at that. Then he straightened as his radio crackled with returning data. He listened, asked for confirmation twice, and wrote down a reference number. Carolyn took a step forward, trying to read his pad, and sank deeper into the softened edge of Samantha's yard. The clay held her there a second longer than she expected. Samantha noticed, and for the first time since the lights came up her driveway, she felt the tension in her chest settle into something steadier than anger. Not triumph yet, just alignment. Facts were finally entering the scene. Mercer looked up. "Miss Fletcher," he said, careful and formal now. "Dispatch confirms your parcel is separately deeded and outside the recorded HOA covenant map. They're still pulling archive permit notes on the outbuilding and drainage covenant reference." He turned to Carolyn. "Ma'am, do you have documentation showing enforcement authority over this specific lot beyond internal HOA bylaws?" Carolyn lifted the clipboard like it weighed more than it had 5 minutes before. The board voted. Samantha folded her hands over one another and waited, quiet as the creek behind her, while the morning finally began to move in her direction. The quiet sat there for a beat after Mercer asked for documentation, and Samantha could feel Carolyn waiting for him to turn that question into obedience. Instead, he kept his pen ready and looked back up at Samantha like a man who had learned to trust whoever answered clearly before sunrise. Samantha nodded toward the chair beside her porch table. "Deputy, if you need to stand there, stand there. But if you want to understand why I'm not opening that gate at 7, this is the part most people skip." Mercer didn't sit, but he shifted his weight and gave her his full attention. Carolyn made a small sound of irritation, then started flipping pages like speed might produce authority. Samantha rested one hand on the arm of her rocker and kept her voice level. "You asked for documents, and you should. But this place isn't numbers first for me. Numbers came later. She pointed, not at the shed, but at the sweet gum near the back fence where the lights caught the wet bark in blue and red. My husband is under that tree. Carolyn's page flipping stopped. Mercer lowered his notebook a little. I'm sorry, ma'am. Samantha gave him a polite nod. The kind people give when they have already carried the worst and don't need sympathy to spill over the edges. His name was Daniel Fletcher. Good carpenter, better man. He built that shed frame with me the summer he got sick, after the first round of treatment when he still had enough strength to argue with me about roof pitch. The creek behind the lot moved soft and steady, and for a moment the flashing lights felt far away to her, like weather over another county. She could see Daniel in a faded Braves cap, pencil behind one ear, laughing because she had measured twice and still cut one board short. He had sanded every door edge by hand because he hated sticky hinges. He had marked stud centers in heavy black marker, each one clean and exact, then written her initials where the back wall would hide them forever. That had been July heat, mosquitoes, hospital calls between hardware store runs, and him pretending the nausea was just bad coffee. It had also been the last thing they finished side by side. We painted it 3 weeks later, she said. Same barn red as the old equipment barn. County file already allowed it on legacy parcels. We knew that because I pulled the schedule myself before buying paint. She paused and glanced at Carolyn. Nothing about that color was an accident. Carolyn lifted her chin. Personal attachment doesn't exempt you from standards. Samantha's gaze stayed calm. That sentence tells me you still don't understand what land records are. Mercer cleared his throat before Carolyn could answer. Ms. Fletcher, for my report, can you explain your occupancy history on the parcel? Just timeline. Sure. Samantha folded her hands loosely. My grandparents raised me right here. My parents died when I was 15. My grandfather taught me how to run grade strings before he taught me to drive. My grandmother taught me to keep receipts and put copies in 2 places because paper is memory when people are gone. She looked across the yard, where dew still silvered the grass tips. This wasn't a weekend house. This was the only place that stayed steady. A neighbor's porch light clicked on up the road. No one came closer, but Samantha could feel eyes through blinds. News traveled faster than creek water in Maple Hollow. She kept going, not dramatic, just plain. When my grandparents passed, trust transferred to me exactly like they planned. I worked county by day, took care of this place evenings and weekends. And when Daniel came into my life, he never once talked about selling. He said land like this isn't owned, it's tended between generations. Her mouth twitched with the smallest smile. He also said my toolbox organization was frightening. Mercer wrote that down with the rest, then seemed to realize what he had done, and almost smiled. Daniel got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in March, Samantha said. By early fall, we were down to routines. Medication times, porch coffee, and small projects that let him feel useful without pretending he wasn't tired. That shed was one of those projects. She tapped the rail once with her ring finger. When he passed, I kept exactly what we built. Same hinges, same color, same hand-cut trim on the south window. Carolyn shifted again in the clay, impatient now in a way that looked less like confidence and more like discomfort. This is emotional theater to dodge compliance. Samantha turned to her then, still seated, still even. No, ma'am. This is context for why your board treating that building like a repaintable prop feels like desecration. The word landed quietly, but Mercer's pen stopped moving when he heard it. I buried my husband's ashes under that sweet gum with county paperwork in one hand and his work gloves in the other. Then your board mailed me invoices to restore visual harmony on the last structure we built together. You may call that enforcement. I call it overreach. Nobody spoke for several seconds. A distant truck down on Lake Spur Road downshifted, then faded. Samantha drew a breath and continued before anyone could break the line of thought. You also need to know why I'm stubborn about this parcel. My grandfather, Earl Whitaker, worked swing shifts at the mill and spent evenings digging drainage by hand because the county didn't pave this side yet. He used to stand right there by the back line, coffee in a jelly jar, and teach me how rain wants to move. Let water do what water does, he'd say. Don't trap it where it'll punish you later. She gestured toward the low corner beyond the shed. That basin behind the brush started as his work. He maintained it, then I maintained it, then Daniel helped me maintain it. Not for applause. Because when storms come, that basin protects this lot and everything downstream. Mercer looked toward the tree line as if he could picture the slope in his head. And Maple Hollow runoff ties into that? It does when the county waiver is active, Samantha said. You'll see it in the covenant language. Carolyn snapped back to volume. The HOA has independent drainage controls. Our engineer signed off. Samantha gave her a brief, almost weary look. Then you'll have no issue when county asks for maintenance logs. The air on the porch sharpened. Carolyn opened her mouth. Shut it, then looked away first. That told Samantha enough about what records existed and what didn't. By the first week of October, when morning started carrying that thin, cold edge, Samantha had settled into a quieter life than most people expected from someone newly retired. She walked the perimeter after breakfast, checked culvert mouths after rain, and kept Daniel's old tape measure in her apron pocket out of habit more than need. Peace had a routine, and routine had kept her upright through grief that arrived in waves instead of storms. Maple Hollow had arrived around that peace in pieces, first with survey flags on neighboring acreage, then with bulldozers, then with sales banners calling the area lake-adjacent luxury, while Samantha still had feed buckets stacked by her back step. She didn't object to neighbors. She objected to strangers pretending the land had begun when their brochures did. Still, first contact had not looked like trouble. It looked like a casserole dish and a smile. She told Mercer that part because it mattered. When the first homes were occupied, Carolyn came up my driveway one Saturday around noon. No patrol cars then. Just a golf cart, pearls, and a welcome packet with a ribbon on it. Carolyn stiffened. I was being neighborly. You were, Samantha said. At first. The memory came back clean. Late spring heat, fresh sod smell drifting from new lots, and Carolyn stepping out of her cart in wedge sandals that weren't made for gravel. She had introduced herself as Carolyn Prescott, board president, and handed over a glossy folder with clubhouse hours, trash pickup rules, and invitations to a community barbecue by the retention pond. She had spoken warmly about shared standards, property values, and how Maple Hollow wanted everyone to feel included, even legacy owners outside the covenant map. Samantha had offered iced tea. Carolyn had accepted, sat on this same porch, and complimented the old cedar posts, running her fingers over tool marks as if reading a texture she didn't quite understand. They had talked about weather, coyotes near the creek, and the best hardware store in town. Nothing in that first hour felt like a threat. She asked me if I'd consider aligning visual elements with the neighborhood palette, Samantha told Mercer. I said I'd look at anything reasonable, but I don't sign what I haven't reviewed, and I don't join associations tied to parcels I'm not legally part of. Samantha's tone stayed matter-of-fact. She smiled and said, Of course, no pressure. Carolyn said quickly, Because there wasn't pressure. We just wanted consistency. Samantha inclined her head. That week, yes. By mid-June, the second contact came as a printed note tucked under Samantha's mailbox flag, thanking her for attending the barbecue invitation in spirit, reminding her of aesthetic cohesion goals, and asking if she had considered repainting the shed to Maple Hollow's approved neutral scheme. The note had a smiley face next to Carolyn's signature. Samantha had written back on plain paper, friendly and direct. Parcel outside HOA, Color County approved, no action required. She had enclosed the permit reference number to save everyone time. A week later, Carolyn came by again, still smiling, still carrying that clipboard. But this time she had 2 board members in the cart behind her. They stood by the fence and nodded through Carolyn's talking points while she described transitional community standards and voluntary harmonization. Samantha listened, then repeated exactly what she had already put in writing. Separate parcel, recorded map, permit on file. No hostility, no raised voices, just lines drawn where law had already drawn them. What changed? Mercer asked. Tone, Samantha said. Tone first, then paperwork. She remembered the day clearly. Sun high, asphalt smell from new paving down Maple Hollow Drive, and Carolyn's smile going tight when Samantha declined to sign a so-called neighborhood courtesy acknowledgement that had 3 buried clauses about dispute mediation under HOA rules. Samantha had handed it back unsigned. Carolyn had accepted it with manicured fingers and said, I'm sure we can revisit once the board has reviewed your position. It sounded polite. It felt like a warning. By late July, envelopes started arriving certified instead of hand-delivered. Still polite at the top, less polite in the middle. References to non-compliant outbuilding coloration and visual nuisance impact radius crept into language that had once said welcome. Samantha answered each letter once, attached the same map excerpt, and logged delivery confirmations in a binder because habits from 26 years at county didn't retire on command. On the porch, in the present, Mercer flipped to a clean page and asked, Did anyone from the HOA ever present a recorded instrument extending covenant authority over your lot? No, Samantha said. Not once. Carolyn cut in. The board acted in good faith based on community standards. Samantha looked at her with a kind of steady sadness that wasn't pity and wasn't anger. Good faith checks records before threatening liens. The words hung there between them while dawn finally broke past gray into pale gold, touching the top edge of the barn-red shed and warming the porch boards under Samantha's slippers. Down at Maple Hollow's entrance, more vehicles had started to gather. Residents slowing at the corner, seeing patrol lights, seeing Carolyn, seeing history and performance share the same wet patch of clay. Samantha rested back in her chair and folded her hands again. That was your initial reasonableness, Deputy, she said. Smiles, welcome packets, and talk about community. I answered every contact, shared every reference number, and asked for one thing only. Respect the line on the map. What came after that was not misunderstanding. It was choice. Carolyn lifted her chin at Samantha's last word like she had been personally accused in court. Choice? She said. No, this was governance. You keep framing routine enforcement as persecution. Samantha did not move from the rocker. Then routine enforcement should survive routine questions, she said. Deputy asked for one recorded instrument. You gave him a vote count. Mercer kept his notebook open, eyes on Carolyn. Ma'am, if you have a filed amendment, annexation document, or signed covenant acceptance for this parcel, now is the time. Carolyn gave a short, brittle smile and tapped her clipboard. Everything relevant is in board records. Samantha's gaze stayed steady. Board records are not county records. That landed harder than volume, and Carolyn knew it. Even through the oversized sunglasses, Samantha could tell by the way Carolyn's jaw set and by the way her fingers tightened around the clipboard edge until her manicured nails went pale. She had built a whole persona around certainty. The pearls at 7 in the morning, the hat brim like a visor before battle, the laminated HOA badge swinging from the lanyard on her golf cart mirror, the sunglasses worn before sunrise so no one could watch her blink. She looked less like a neighbor and more like someone auditioning for authority in front of an audience she believed she deserved. Mercer asked, "Ms. Fletcher, walk me through first formal enforcement contact with dates, if you can." Samantha nodded once. Last Monday in July, 9:14 a.m., she drove up in that golf cart with one board member and a stack of color swatches. She tipped her chin toward Carolyn's cart parked near the ditch, mud on the tires, badge still hanging. She didn't knock. She called from the driveway. "Samantha, we need to fix this visual violation before appraisal season." Samantha's voice remained level, but the memory sharpened her eyes. I stepped onto the porch, and she held up a page called Friendly Correction Notice. She said, "Just pick one neutral and we can pretend this never happened." Carolyn cut in fast. "That was a courtesy. It was your first written claim that my structure was subject to HOA design control," Samantha said. "I told you no, handed you the parcel map copy, and offered the county permit number again. You were dismissive. I was precise." Mercer looked between them and wrote, "What happened next?" "By Friday that week, I got a fine letter for $500. Samantha spoke the amount like she was reading from a ledger. "No hearing date, no jurisdiction basis, just a demand and a due date 10 days out." She reached to the table beside her and tapped a slim zip envelope she had already set there. I kept envelope, postmark, and the letter. I mailed a response certified with return receipt. Same answer. Separate deed, outside covenant boundary, no authority. A breeze moved through the pines, and somewhere down the road, a screen door banged shut. Mercer took the envelope when Samantha offered it, glanced at the green return card attached with a paperclip, then handed it back. Carolyn shifted her footing again. One heel made a wet sound in the clay as she pulled it free. "By the second week of August," Samantha continued, "Carolyn stopped coming alone. She showed up with 2 board members, one carrying a tablet, one taking pictures of my shed over the fence." Samantha looked at Mercer. "I told them they were photographing private improvements from outside the line, which they can do. I also told them if they crossed my gate, they'd be trespassing." Carolyn said, "And I remember this exactly. The board can enter for corrective work once penalties mature." Carolyn straightened. "That is standard language in most communities." "Not on land your community does not own?" Samantha said. "You quoted enforcement rights from covenants that stop at my back pin." Mercer asked quietly, "Did they cross the gate that day?" "No, but she rattled it twice while telling me legal would handle me." Carolyn laughed once. "I touched a gate latch. Let's not dramatize." Samantha's reply came soft. "People who respect lines don't test locks while announcing legal action." The second deputy stepped up onto the gravel edge of the driveway, listened without speaking, then returned to his unit when dispatch called his radio. The red and blue light kept rolling across the barn-red shed in clean, patient pulses. Then came the administrative stack, Samantha said. 500 became 1,500 with processing penalties, then 3,000 with weekly non-compliance charges. By September 3rd, it was 6,200. By September 18th, it was 10,000 even. She let that number sit in the damp morning air. Every notice cited bylaws by section number. None cited a recorded grant of power over my parcel. Mercer asked, "You replied each time?" "Once by letter, after that by email with attachments and delivery confirmations, because repeating the same fact 10 ways doesn't make it more true." She looked toward Carolyn. "I asked one question in every response. Provide recorded authority over parcel 17A. I never got an answer." Carolyn snapped her clipboard open and turned it so Mercer could see columns highlighted in yellow. "We assessed under visual blight provisions and board emergency authority. She had opportunities to cure." Mercer's expression stayed neutral. "Emergency from shed color." Carolyn missed the undertone and charged ahead. "Uniformity failures spread. If you let one lot ignore standards, the whole corridor degrades." Samantha almost smiled. That sentence would matter if my lot belonged to your corridor. 3 days after the 10,000 notice, Samantha told him, a certified envelope arrived stamped, "Final demand and intent to lien." It was printed on HOA letterhead, with a copied signature block from counsel who had not personally signed it. It threatened referral for collection, lien filing, and forced sale remedies under association declarations. Forced sale, on paper, over paint, they could not regulate. Samantha had read it standing at her kitchen counter where Daniel used to sort screws by size in old coffee tins. And she had felt the same cold clarity she used to feel when developers tried to slide wetland fill through as landscaping. Not panic, not fury, just pattern recognition. "I called the number listed at the bottom," Samantha said. Not to argue, to verify if counsel had reviewed parcel boundaries. Mercer glanced up. "Did they answer?" "A paralegal did, very polite. She asked for my case number, I gave it. I gave parcel ID too. She put me on hold 6 minutes, came back and said, 'Our office represents the board's internal process only.' I asked if they had county map overlay in file. She said she couldn't discuss. So I logged the call time and moved on." Carolyn's head turned sharply. "You called legal behind the board's back?" Samantha looked at her, unblinking. "There is no behind your back with certified threats. Once you mail paper, paper travels." By the end of that same week, Carolyn escalated from paper to performance. She came to the fence at 5:40 p.m. in full board attire, pearls and hat and all, carrying a paint deck and a contractor brochure in a clear sleeve. 2 residents stood 10 feet behind her like witnesses. Samantha had been coiling a garden hose. Carolyn did not greet her. She announced, "You have 72 hours before we dispatch corrective labor." Samantha had walked to the fence, kept both hands visible, and said, "Do not send labor onto this parcel." Carolyn replied, "The board has already approved entry." Samantha said, "Board approval is not a key." Carolyn said, louder because volume was her substitute for verification, "You are obstructing lawful maintenance." Samantha answered, "This is my fence." That exchange lasted less than 2 minutes, but it revealed the whole structure of Carolyn's thinking. She never asked for the file number. She never asked to see the map Samantha had offered half a dozen times. She never asked county. She declared, she repeated, she threatened, and she expected compliance as if repetition itself could annex land. Mercer wrote for several quiet seconds. "And the 911 call?" Samantha nodded. "September 26th, 1:07 p.m. I was replacing 2 warped trim boards on the shed's west side. Like for like, no footprint change, no height change, no new slab. Carolyn called dispatch and reported unauthorized construction in HOA common area. She tilted her head toward him. Deputy Nolan responded first. Good man. He asked for permit status. I showed him maintenance exemption language and the existing file. Carolyn interrupted 3 times with, board voted stop work. Deputy Nolan told her board votes don't override county classification. The second deputy by the cruiser glanced up at that name and gave a small nod, confirming he knew the call. Samantha continued. Nolan asked her for boundary proof. She handed him bylaws. He gave them back and said, "Ma'am, this is civil if your map doesn't include the lot." He cleared the scene with no citation. Samantha paused and then added, Carolyn posted in the resident group that evening that law enforcement had confirmed HOA jurisdiction pending compliance action. I took screenshots before she deleted it. Mercer's pen stopped. You still have those? In the binder, time-stamped. Carolyn's face flushed above the collar of her raincoat. Private group communication is not relevant. Mercer said, if it relates to the complaint pattern, it may be. A pickup slowed at the Maple Hollow entrance, then rolled on. The sky had shifted from slate to thin gold now, enough to show the county line stakes near the ditch if someone cared to look. Carolyn had never looked at them once. Samantha kept a sequence. October 2nd, I got a new notice called Corrective Action Authorization. It stated the board had contracted a repaint crew for mandatory compliance, assessed mobilization at 2,300, and scheduled entry at 7 a.m. today. She let Mercer absorb that. It also said off-duty security would be present to ensure access. No legal access right attached, no court order, no consent form, just a schedule. Mercer's brows drew together. That's why you said they had a crew on standby. Yes. Carolyn recovered enough to speak in her boardroom cadence. Because delays increase cost exposure for all members. Samantha's answer stayed calm. I'm not your member. Carolyn raised her voice. Visual nonconformity impacts everyone. You don't get to hide behind technicalities while the community suffers. Samantha rested her palms on the rocker arms and finally stood, unhurried, like she had all morning. She was not tall, but standing changed the geometry of the porch. Boundary law is not a technicality, she said. It is the line between order and trespass. Mercer took one half step back to keep sightlines open, then asked, Ms. Fletcher, did anything else occur after that notice? One more thing, Samantha said. Yesterday at 4:52 p.m., a board email went out to residents saying enforcement costs might require a special assessment because of legacy parcel resistance. They turned a dispute they created into a dues issue. That brought pressure from neighbors before dawn and set this scene. Her eyes shifted to Carolyn's sunglasses. You didn't just send letters. You tried to conscript the whole subdivision. Carolyn said, leadership requires difficult decisions. Samantha reached for the side table and lifted a narrow county binder with colored tabs, then held it against her hip. Leadership requires reading the documents people hand you. Mercer looked at the binder, then at her. Is that the drainage covenant reference dispatch mentioned? It is, Samantha said. And it does more than settle shed paint. Carolyn gave a strained laugh. You keep waving old county paperwork like a magic trick. Samantha met her squarely. No trick, just the file your board has been benefiting from for 4 years, while you tried to find me off my own land. The porch went still again, even the creek seeming quieter for a beat. And Mercer keyed his radio for county code enforcement, with a tone that told everyone present this had moved past neighborhood theater and into record-backed consequences. Carolyn had barely finished objecting to the county call when a diesel engine rattled at the end of the driveway, followed by a white box truck with Magnolia Surface Solutions painted in blue script across the side. A second vehicle rolled in behind it. Black SUV, tinted windows, a magnetic placard on the door that read, "Pinnacle Site Security." The repaint crew had not waited for 7. They had come early enough to catch the dark. Carolyn lifted her clipboard like a flag. "Perfect timing," she said, voice suddenly bright with command. "Set up at the fence line. We are cleared for corrective action." Deputy Mercer turned to her, palm out. "No one is cleared for entry right now. This is an active dispute." One of the painters, a tired-looking man in coveralls with a roller cage sticking out of his back pocket, slowed and looked straight at Mercer. "We were told legal access was confirmed last night," he said. "We have a work order, sheriff presence, and a paid mobilization." Samantha felt the old plans office instinct settle in, that exact moment when bad paperwork met real consequences. She did not raise her voice. She stepped to the porch edge, binder tucked to her side, and looked at the crew instead of Carolyn. "You're being misinformed. That fenced yard is private parcel 17A. Nobody hired by this board has permission to cross that gate." Carolyn swung toward the crew before Mercer could answer. "Do not listen to her. The board voted emergency enforcement under visual blight authority. We build this as common area preservation." She jabbed her pen toward the shed. "Post notice. Begin prep." The security contractor, broad-shouldered and clean-shaven, took 3 steps toward the latch. Mercer's tone hardened. "Sir, stop at the gate." The man stopped, but only just. "Ma'am told us obstruction was expected." "She's not issuing law enforcement orders," Mercer said. "Hold position." For one thin second, the whole yard hung in a bad balance. Patrol lights spinning over wet cedar, paint buckets clinking in the back of the truck, Carolyn breathing fast through a practiced smile. The creek running behind the sweet gum like it wanted no part of any of it. Then Carolyn did the one thing Samantha had expected and still found astonishing. She reached into her folder, pulled out a yellow sheet, and held it high so everyone could see the stamp at the top. Corrective entry notice. At the bottom was a timeline and a line item. Access Facilitation Security Deployment Authorized. "This is executed," she said. "As of 6 this morning, non-compliance triggered forced correction." Samantha saw Mercer reading over from a distance, and she saw him catch the signature block. It was not a judge, not counsel. It was Carolyn Prescott, board president, signed on behalf of all affected property interests. Affected property interests. Carolyn had signed her own authority over land she did not own, then hired security to enforce it. That was the worst of it. Not the money and not the letters. This was seizure dressed up as administration. Samantha heard her grandfather's voice in memory, calm as gravel under boots. "People tell you who they are when they cross a fence and call it paperwork." The second deputy left his cruiser and moved to Mercer's side. "We got neighbors gathering by the entrance," he said quietly. "Phone's out." Carolyn heard him and raised her volume for the audience she couldn't quite see. "Residents deserve standards. We cannot allow one legacy holdout to drag values down. This is board-directed maintenance." Samantha looked at her, steady and almost sad. "You billed my neighbors for a trespass package." Carolyn snapped back. "I billed members for compliance they elected." "You billed them for a fight you manufactured," Samantha said. "And you did it on my land." By 6:47 a.m., 3 Maple Hollow residents stood near the road shoulder pretending to check mail while watching every word. The painter in coveralls set his bucket down and backed away from the gate 2 careful steps. like someone who had done enough side jobs to know when a contract smelled wrong. Mercer spoke to Carolyn with clipped professionalism. "Ma'am, I am advising you clearly. No entry. No posting. No work start. If anyone crosses that gate before ownership and authority are confirmed, you are exposing your board and this crew to trespass allegations." Carolyn's face went red above the pearl collar. "You are obstructing lawful HOA action. I am preventing escalation. You are taking her side. I am taking the side of verified records." Carolyn laughed once, sharp and thin. "Records? She's waving a county scrapbook." Samantha finally moved. She set her coffee mug farther back on the rail, opened the binder on the porch table, and turned it so Mercer could see tabbed sections in clear sleeves. Deed chain, parcel map, permit file, covenant instrument, license agreement, maintenance log excerpts. Every page dated, indexed, and copied twice. She tapped one tab marked Basin License. "Deputy, this is the useful document. Not because it proves my fence line. That part's easy. This proves what her board has been standing on while calling me non-compliant." Mercer stepped up onto the first porch plank, removed one glove, and took the page carefully. Samantha spoke without flourish, the way she used to explain a correction note to a contractor who wanted shortcuts. "Recorded maintenance covenant, book and page in county records. My parcel contains the grandfathered retention basin and overflow channel Maple Hollow tied into for stormwater performance. 4 years ago, county approved their waiver package based on this private infrastructure remaining in documented condition. Same package supported their clubhouse occupancy approval and emergency turn lane permit at Lake Spur Road." Mercer scanned the header, then the highlighted clause near the center. Samantha pointed with one finger. "Read section 9. He read aloud, slow enough for everyone to hear. "Licensee, meaning Maple Hollow Homeowners Association, shall refrain from harassment, unauthorized entry, or interference with license or parcel operations. Material breach allows immediate revocation of private drainage license pending county review." The security contractor lowered his eyes to the ground. One of the paint crew muttered, "We're not touching that gate." Carolyn tried to talk over the page. "That is drainage language, not aesthetics. It has nothing to do with a shed color violation." Samantha did not even glance at her. "It has everything to do with this morning. You used board process to authorize unauthorized entry. That is listed as a material breach in the same instrument your clubhouse permit depends on." Mercer flipped to the next page, where the county approval memo was attached behind the covenant copy. He read 2 lines, then looked up, then looked. The confusion was gone from his face now. "Ms. Prescott, did your board disclose this license condition when issuing enforcement notices?" Carolyn's jaw tightened. "We are not required to seek her approval for internal compliance." "That wasn't my question." She hesitated half a second too long. "The board acted under advice." "From who?" "Our governance committee." The second deputy let out a breath through his nose and looked away toward the road. Samantha slid another page from the binder and handed it to Mercer. "This is last night's resident email announcing special assessment exposure for today's contractor mobilization. This is the contractor estimate. This is your yellow entry notice signed by her, claiming affected property interests she does not hold." Mercer read each line, then keyed his radio with a different tone than before, formal and unmistakably procedural. "Dispatch, this is Mercer. Escalate county code enforcement priority. I need an on-scene inspector for potential permit impact breach tied to covenant instrument 843, page 211. Also request supervisor." The radio crackled confirmation. Carolyn stepped toward him. "You cannot bring county into a private HOA matter." Mercer looked at her with patient disbelief. Ma'am, county was already in it when your permits relied on this parcel. That was the moment Samantha watched Carolyn's posture change, not all at once, but in small, failing pieces. The clipboard lowered. The shoulders that had stayed squared all morning tilted inward. She looked past Mercer toward the shed as if the color itself had betrayed her, then back at the binder like it had appeared out of nowhere. Samantha turned one more page and held it where Carolyn could see the highlighted block. You quoted emergency authority in your notices, she said quietly. Your own board handbook says indemnity protections fail if an officer acts outside recorded jurisdiction after written warning. I sent 6 written warnings with map attachments. Carolyn swallowed. You're threatening me. I'm describing your paperwork. The security contractor took out his phone. We're logging hold, he told his partner. No entry, no contact. The painter in coveralls walked back to his truck and started loading his rollers in reverse, slow and deliberate, not fleeing, just removing himself from a mess he had not signed up to own. Samantha stood on her porch in slippers with creek air on her face and watched the scene settle into fact. She felt anger, yes, but below it, something steadier. The clean relief of finally being on the page that mattered. 38 minutes after Mercer's call, a county pickup with code compliance stenciled on the door turned in behind the patrol units. Another vehicle followed with engineering review decals. 2 inspectors stepped out, carrying hard cases and tablets. One gray-haired, one younger, with mud already on her boots by the time she reached the driveway. Carolyn lifted her chin again, trying to recover the role she had worn since dawn. We have this under control, she began. This resident is non-compliant and obstructive. The gray-haired inspector looked from Carolyn to Samantha to the binder in Mercer's hand. Who requested review on covenant-linked waiver conditions? Mercer answered. I did. Possible material breach, unauthorized entry attempt, enforcement outside jurisdiction. The younger inspector asked, Parcel ID. Samantha gave it from memory. Then she gave the covenant book and page, the waiver reference number, and the clubhouse permit ID without checking a single note. The younger inspector's eyebrows lifted as she typed. I have it. Private license dependency confirmed. Carolyn opened her mouth, but the gray-haired inspector held up one finger. Ma'am, stop speaking for a moment and listen. If this association initiated corrective work on a non-member parcel without recorded authority, your waiver status may be suspended pending full audit. Do not authorize another step. For the first time all morning, Carolyn said nothing. Samantha closed the binder gently and rested her hand on the cover. Behind her, the barn-red shed caught the first real stripe of sun through the pines, deep and unbothered. Exactly the color it had been when Daniel's hands were still steady on a paintbrush. The gray-haired inspector stepped onto Samantha's porch, accepted the binder with both hands, and asked for every supporting item tied to the HOA notices. Samantha did not hurry. She laid the zip envelope with certified receipts on the table, then the printed screenshots from the resident group, then the yellow corrective entry notice Carolyn had held over her head like a warrant. Mercer added his incident notes and the time-stamped body cam reference number. The younger inspector photographed each page, tagged them in her tablet, and read the labels out loud as she went, like she wanted no room for confusion later. Exhibit 1, Deed Chain and Parcel Map. Exhibit 2, Permit File for Accessory Structure Color Schedule. Exhibit 3, Private Drainage License and Covenant Conditions. Exhibit 4, Notice Sequence and Fine Escalation. Exhibit 5, Planned Forced Entry Work Order and Contractor Estimate. Carolyn tried to cut in twice, and both times the gray-haired inspector answered without heat. "Ma'am, you'll have full chance to respond at the office. Right now, we are preserving the field record." When Carolyn said the board had already voted, and this was a private governance matter, the inspector pointed toward Samantha's back line and said, "Your waiver package converted this into a county compliance matter the day your association accepted dependency on that basin. That is not punishment. That is the framework you signed." By 8:03 that morning, 2 more county vehicles had arrived, including transportation review for the emergency turn lane permit Maple Hollow used at the Lake Spur entrance. The engineers walked the swale with measuring rods, while Samantha opened her fence only for county staff and deputies. No one else crossed. The security crew stayed by their SUV, hands-off equipment, and Magnolia Surface Solutions called their office on speaker so the county could hear the cancellation reason in real time. Client represented access rights that are disputed and likely invalid. The painter in coveralls said, looking at no one in particular, "We are withdrawing to avoid trespass exposure." He sounded tired, but he sounded honest. At 9:11, the younger inspector came back from the ditch line with mud up to her calves and said, "Fence encroachment confirmed at clubhouse side, approximately 31 inches into licensed maintenance strip." She turned her tablet so Mercer could see. Also seeing unpermitted expansion at the rear service room. Occupancy load changed, no revision approved. The gray-haired inspector called that in immediately and asked dispatch to issue stop work authority and post tags before noon. Carolyn's shoulders drew tighter with every sentence, and when she tried to claim the fence had been there for years, Samantha answered quietly, "Your own contractor installed it in May. I have the invoice copy from your resident email packet." The last crack came from a detail Carolyn had treated like paperwork trivia. The inspector asked for Maple Hollow's quarterly drainage maintenance logs, the same logs required under the license renewal certification. Carolyn said their vendor handled those. The inspector asked for the vendor report number. Carolyn looked down at her clipboard and did not answer. She started, stopped, then said, "The board secretary has files." The inspector nodded once and replied, "Then we'll treat your certification as unsupported pending production." Her tone stayed polite. The meaning did not. At 11:26, county staff and deputies stood with Samantha at the Maple Hollow gate, while stop work notices were stapled to the clubhouse entrance, the side service door, and the construction fence around the expansion pad. The red county tags fluttered in the breeze like warning flags. Residents gathered in clusters along the sidewalk, whispering in that sharp, brittle way people do when dues and liability enter the same sentence. Mercer did not grandstand. He simply told anyone who asked that no criminal arrests were being made and that county code would issue formal findings by end of day. Samantha did not follow Carolyn through the crowd. She went home, changed her mud-spotted slippers, and met her attorney at her kitchen table at 1:40 p.m. Mr. Harden arrived in a navy suit that had seen better years, set a worn leather briefcase beside Daniel's old coffee tins, and listened without interruption while Samantha walked him through the morning in sequence. Then she gave him every item in duplicate: binder copy, screenshots, call logs, security camera stills of the golf cart tire tracks and the gate latch tests, certified letters with green cards, and Mercer's incident number. He reviewed the covenant clause once, tapped Section 9 with a fountain pen, and said in his scratchy voice, "Proportionate response is straightforward. We revoke private access license pending cure, demand written withdrawal of all fines, demand reimbursement for documented trespass preparation and restoration, and notify members that indemnity may not cover officers acting outside jurisdiction after warning." He dictated while Samantha typed. No theatrics, no threats, just terms. Revocation effective immediately. Basin access suspended except emergency county-directed entry. HOA responsible for independent temporary stormwater controls within 72 hours. All shed-related fines void and removed from any ledger or collection file. Reimbursement due for gate hardware replacement, soil restoration at the rutted yard edge, and professional review time created by false enforcement actions. He added one final paragraph, grounded in their own bylaws. Formal notice that the board president's conduct triggered indemnity review and member vote provisions. At 3:05, they walked into the Maple Hollow clubhouse for the emergency board meeting already in progress. The room smelled like burnt coffee and panic. Carolyn stood at the front table with her clipboard and pearls still on, but the sunglasses were gone. And for the first time, Samantha saw her eyes clearly. They looked less angry than cornered. A treasurer Samantha recognized from the fence line visit kept rubbing his forehead and repeating, "We told legal this was messy." So that was the loaded silence from the second board member months earlier. He had known enough to worry and still did nothing. Mr. Hardin handed the revocation packet to the board secretary and read the operative sections aloud. When he reached the line about immediate suspension of the private license, a man in the back stood up and said, "Hold on. Does that mean the county can pull our waiver?" The younger county inspector, present by request, answered from the side wall, "The waiver is already suspended pending remedial compliance and document production." The room shifted all at once, chairs scraping, voices rising, then dropping when Mercer's supervisor asked for order. Carolyn tried one last push. "This is retaliation over paint." Samantha answered from her seat, hands folded on the table, voice low and clean. "No, ma'am. This is consequence for unauthorized entry attempts on land your board does not control while benefiting from infrastructure you do not own." She let the sentence settle, then added, "My shed stays barn red. Your association can cure violations and reapply when county clears you." The vote came 40 minutes later. First motion: rescind all fines, fees, and corrective charges levied against Parcel 17A. Passed, unanimous, except Carolyn abstaining. Second motion: accept revocation terms and authorize council to confirm compliance path with county. Passed. Third motion, brought by the treasurer with shaking hands. No confidence in Carolyn Prescott as board president under indemnity risk clause. That one passed by clear majority, and Carolyn sat down so slowly her chair legs whispered across the tile. She did not speak again. She signed the resignation line at 4:22 p.m., clipped her laminated badge from her folder, and set it on the table beside the same yellow notice she had waved at dawn. 3 days later, Samantha stood with Mr. Hardin at the county office while the final administrative pieces locked in. The HOA's council filed written withdrawal of all shed fines and confirmed no lien action had ever been recorded. Code enforcement issued formal violation notices for unapproved clubhouse expansion, fence encroachment, and false drainage maintenance certification, each with daily penalties until cure. Samantha's restoration invoice was accepted in full with payment terms signed by the interim board. Dispatch closed the trespass complaint as unfounded, with parcel verification attached. Even the paralegal from that earlier phone call returned Samantha's voicemail and said, "Careful and professional. Our file now reflects no enforcement authority over your lot." That evening, the quiet came back the way it had always come there, not all at once, but in layers. Samantha sat in her old hickory rocker at dusk, with fresh coffee cooling in her hand, and the creak audible again beyond the sweet gum. Down the road, county tags still hung on the Maple Hollow gates, bright against the fading light. Her barn-red shed caught soft gold along the trim Daniel had sanded smooth. And the color looked exactly like memory should look, steady and unashamed. She had accounted for every piece of paper before she sat down. One binder copy stayed in her hall cabinet beside the trust records. One copy went to Mr. Hardin's office. Digital scans were backed up to 2 drives, just like her grandmother taught her. The security stills were logged and closed. The screenshots were printed, stamped received, and filed. Mercer's report number was written in black marker on the inside cover, where she could find it in 10 years if she ever needed to. Nothing loose, nothing dangling. A little after sunset, Deputy Mercer drove by without lights, slowed at her gate, and tipped 2 fingers from the steering wheel. Samantha returned the gesture with her mug. No speech needed. He had done his job. So had she. Across the fence line, 2 Maple Hollow residents walked the shoulder and paused long enough to offer a plain apology for the bored email and the morning spectacle. Samantha thanked them, said she wanted no feud, only boundaries respected, and meant it. They nodded, looking relieved, and kept walking toward the clubhouse where contractors were already measuring for legal fixes instead of cosmetic campaigns. When full dark settled in, Samantha rested her palm on the porch rail and found the old planer groove from her father's thumb. Same mark, same wood, same house, same yard. The patrol lights were gone. The clipboard kingdom was over. The creek kept moving behind the trees, and in that returning stillness, she heard what she had wanted all along. Not victory noise, just peace, lawful and ordinary, holding its line.